My life wasn't a silver spoon, it was a shovel. I started working at 12 years old in the blistering heat of Phoenix, carrying bricks, bussing tables, taking every odd job that paid cash. My hands are a map of scars and calluses, a history I carried with pride. Every dollar I saved wasn't for a vacation or a new truck, it was for the future of the family. I hadn't even started yet. When my wife, Clara, gave birth to our only son, Nathaniel Nate Sterling, I looked at that tiny, helpless face and made a vow. He would never know the hunger or the struggle I did. I became a machine, working double shifts, driving trucks and running a small, unlicensed repair shop in a cramped garage. I didn't care if my back ached or my knees screamed Nate would have a better life. I skipped meals so he could have a new school uniform from the mall. I worked 7 days a week so he could go to the best private school in the area. A school filled with the children of lawyers and doctors. Education, I told myself, was the key, so I scrimped on my own health insurance and postponed every necessary repair on our modest house. But I never, ever skimped on Nate. When he was a teenager, he wanted a dirt bike. I sold my only piece of gold jewelry, a ring from my own father, to buy it. When he graduated college and wanted his first car, a shiny new Lexus, I handed him the savings I'd earmarked for a new roof. That car cost more than I had earned in 3 years, but I didn't care. He was my pride. I wanted him to be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with his friends, without shame. When Nate married Chloe, a woman from a respectable, but not wealthy, family, I footed the bill for a lavish wedding at a San Diego resort. My wife and I lived in a small, old house, but we wanted Nate's start to be grand. The ultimate sacrifice came when he and Chloe were ready to buy their first home. I cashed out a large portion of my retirement savings, the meager nest egg I had worked 40 years to build, and gave it to them for the down payment on a beautiful, spacious house in an upscale suburb of Los Angeles. I told him, "This is your foundation. Build on it." What I didn't say was that I had nothing left to build my own future on. I thought I didn't need it, because I believed blood meant loyalty, and that respect was automatic between father and son. I even added Nate's name to my bank and investment accounts, a mistake I would later come to regret more than anything. I thought seeing his name next to mine on $1 million account would instill a sense of responsibility and pride. I thought it would remind him that everything I earned was for him. Instead, it only bred arrogance. He began to treat the money as his own, spending lavishly on gadgets, first-class trips to Miami, and expensive dinners with friends. When I asked about the savings, he'd wave me off with a casual, "Don't worry, old man, I've got this." He didn't realize those accounts were still legally and primarily mine. He mistook my generosity for his birthright, my trust for his ownership. All my life I gave, and I truly believed that when I grew old, frail, and finally moved into the home he purchased with my money, which I never corrected him on, he would treat me with dignity. I dreamed of hearing him say, "Father, you've done enough. Let me take care of you." But my dream was shattered. What I thought was love was entitlement. The disrespect started small. He spoke to me with short, cutting answers, viewing my wisdom as boring lectures. He saw me not as his father, but as an inconvenience. When I needed a ride to the veterans clinic for my weary joints, he would groan and complain about the gas money. The food I paid for suddenly became a subject of passive-aggressive commentary. "Do you really need to eat that much rice?" he'd ask, cutting me to the core. As I remembered the nights I went hungry so he wouldn't. My medical bills became his preferred weapon. "You're lucky I even let you stay here," he'd mutter when I asked for help covering a prescription. He loved showing off to the neighbors, loudly proclaiming how he was taking care of his old father, making me sound like a charity case living in his gracious house, the house my sweat and my savings built. His wife, Chloe, followed suit, treating me like an unwanted guest. She would make disgusted faces if I coughed too loud or left my shoes near the door. Once, I even heard her suggest to Nate that old people should stay in nursing homes, not disturb the whole house. Nate just laughed. The respect was completely gone. I stayed silent. I thought silence was strength, a shield against pushing him further away. I thought patience would make him remember the sacrifices, but patience only fed his entitlement, twisting my role from father to servant. He began to treat the house my house, legally as his kingdom. Close the door. Turn off the light. Don't sit there. Each command was a fresh reminder of my lost dignity. Even my grandchildren started copying his tone, finding it acceptable to mock their slow, quiet grandfather. I swallowed the humiliation, day after day, until one ordinary night, the shield of silence was utterly destroyed. It was dinner, simple takeout from a local Asian restaurant. We sat at the big mahogany table, the kids playing with their chopsticks. I had a small, modest helping of rice and vegetables. I ate slowly, as I always did, but after I finished, I was still hungry. I looked at the bowl, saw there was plenty left for everyone, and made a simple request. Could I have just a little more rice, please? The room fell into a sudden, awful silence. Nate's face twisted into an expression of pure, unadulterated annoyance. He didn't answer with words. He simply reached for the glass of ice water sitting beside his plate. Before I could process the look in his eyes, he leaned across the table and threw the water directly into my face. The cold splash hit me like a physical blow. My glasses were instantly obscured, my shirt soaked, and the small amount of rice left on my plate ruined. I froze, dripping, staring at my son, waiting for a laugh, a sign that it was all a terrible, tasteless joke. But his eyes were hard. "That's enough, old man," he spat. "Stop acting like a king in my house." The humiliation was absolute. The water was nothing, but the dignity, once washed away in front of my own family, never dries. Chloe giggled awkwardly. The children stared, learning their final, terrible lesson about their grandfather's value. I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I didn't even look him in the eye again. I simply stood up slowly, walked to my room, and closed the door. Behind me, the laughter and clinking of dishes resumed, as if humiliating me was just a casual, daily event. I sat on the edge of my bed, the water dripping from my hair. My hands were shaking, not from cold, but from a cold, focused rage. I lay awake for hours, replaying the scene. He thought he had broken me. He thought the water had made me powerless. But in reality, it was the final, fatal mistake he would ever make. In that silence, I made a plan, a quiet, calculated plan that would end not in my defeat, but in his utter downfall. My son lived in a kingdom of illusion. He believed he was in charge, the owner, the one with power. But as I lay there, I remembered the forgotten truth. I had never surrendered control. The house deed was still solely in Elijah Sterling's name. The investment accounts were joint, yes, but I was the primary account holder with full authority. I had given him access and trust, but I had never, ever signed away my rights. He had built his arrogance on a foundation that was never his, and at any moment, I could take it back. That realization didn't just calm my shaking hands, it turned my humiliation into an icy, unyielding resolve. The next morning, I was a ghost. I ate a quiet breakfast, dressed in a clean shirt, and acted as if nothing had happened. Nate didn't even acknowledge my presence. This made my task easier. I walked to my room, pulled out the secured folder containing all the legal documents, the property deed, the account agreements, the full statements, and I went to the bank. I spoke to my longtime banker, Mr. Chen, a man who had seen me work and save for decades. I told him I needed to completely restructure my portfolio. I wanted every dollar from the joint accounts moved into a new, private account solely in my name. No shared access. No joint signatures. No exceptions. Mr. Chen looked surprised but nodded. "It's your absolute right, Mr. Sterling." I signed the forms. Page after page, stroke after stroke. I erased my son from the financial world he thought was his kingdom. Within 3 hours, a total of $3.1 million, the entire savings, the investment capital, the retirement fund I was living off of had been shifted into a separate, secure account. His access was cancelled. His name was obliterated. The future he bragged about was gone with a few strokes of a pen. I walked out of that bank feeling lighter than air. My final step was the house. I made an appointment with a real estate lawyer, Ms. Davis, instructing her to prepare a short-term lease agreement for Nate and Chloe, effective immediately, with a 30-day eviction clause attached, set to be delivered a week after my departure. They had to be made to understand that they were not owners, they were tenants. That evening, Nate was watching a Lakers game, laughing loudly. He didn't even glance at me. I sat down, drank a glass of water, and kept my silence. The final battle was not going to be fought with confrontation. It was going to be fought with absence. I packed my small suitcase, passport, medicines, documents, and the cash I had quietly withdrawn over 2 days, and booked a one-way ticket to a quiet coastal town in Portugal. I also sent an email to my personal attorney, Mr. Halloran, attaching a sealed letter to be delivered to Nate 3 weeks after my flight. At dawn, 2 days later, I slipped out of the house. No one saw me leave. Nate was asleep, Chloe was snoring, and the children were dreaming. I stepped out onto the lawn, felt the cool, clean air, and walked to the waiting taxi. I didn't look back. I was erasing myself from their lives. When my plane took off from LAX, I felt the final chain break. I was gone. My son would wake up and find his card declined, his accounts empty, his name stripped from the financial records. The panic would build into a frantic, chaotic search. 3 weeks later, the final blow landed. Nate, already reeling from the financial collapse, opened his door to find Mr. Halloran holding a plain envelope. Nate's face, haggard and pale from stress, begged for a reprieve. But the lawyer simply handed him the note and walked away. The letter was short, written in my steady, familiar hand. You threw water on my face and insulted my dignity for a spoonful of rice. I drained the life you thought was yours. That was the price. No signature, no address, just finality. Nate, the arrogant man who thought he was a king, stood in the doorway of a house he didn't own, holding the piece of paper that confirmed his ultimate powerlessness. His wife walked away without a word. His children saw their father broken. For the first time, the man who had mocked his father for being old was now left scrambling to survive, stripped bare, his pride and his foundation utterly destroyed. I started my new life in Cascais, Portugal, renting a small apartment near the sea. The days are quiet, filled with slow walks and peaceful meals. No one here knows my past, and no one calls me a burden. Justice for me wasn't about watching him suffer, it was about knowing I could walk free. He had thrown water on my face, I had washed away his future. He lost everything because he could not give the smallest thing, respect. If you're wondering how I'm doing, let's just say the quiet here in Cascais is the best kind of revenge.